Greetings! Welcome to this beginning of our beginners class in photography. My name is Michael Markowsky. I'm an artist, photographer, writer based in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I'm going to be your photography instructor for the next hour or the next month, depending on how many of these classes you decided to watch. I'll just give you a quick little rundown as to the structure of these courses. This class and all 10 sessions are going to be about 1 hour with about 10 to 20 minutes of questions and answers at the very end. Although when you're writing comments here in the comment section, or I guess they're down below on YouTube where you're watching it, I will be kind of periodically checking in and out about every 15 minutes or so, just so if there's any burning questions or things that I've missed, I'll check at that when I get the chance. But if there's other things, larger questions that you have, I know a few people have been contacting me about like what kind of camera should I get and all that kind of stuff. I think we'll save those more detailed questions till the very end where it's a little bit more freewheeling. So we'll do that at the end. But if you do have questions as we go, I would love to hear them and be able to read some of them. And we've got, I've got almost a dozen responses to my initial question already up here. So that's great. I asked people what kind of cameras you have, and then what kind of photography you want to be able to do. And because those are really important things for you to understand and for me to understand so that I can help you. Okay, so let me see. I've got kind of this is a little bit interesting situation that I think everybody's dealing with right now. And I've just so you have a little bit of understanding about who I am. I'm a professional visual artist. I make drawings, paintings, photographs, video, performative stuff, films, and I've been doing that for over, almost 25 years now. And photography has been a big part of all of those things. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about my own background. If you're interested, I think it's pretty easy for you to find more information about me online. You're on YouTube, so you can click on the rest of my videos. I've got hundreds of videos showing all sorts of different kinds of work that I've done. And then if you're interested, in the links below in the video description, there's my website and Instagram and all that. So you're welcome to peruse those at your leisure. I have also been teaching this photography class in person for about 10 years, and I've probably taught it in one form or another upwards of 50, 60 times, probably, over that period of time, 5 to 7 times every single year. And I think I've kind of got a little bit of the, kind of a good system down. So I'm going to try my best to use that same sort of process when I'm working here virtually, although it is a little bit strange talking to people and not being able to kind of see your smiling faces and see the kind of confusion when I've missed something. So I'm going to do my best to make all of this work, and I'm really excited that there's so many people that have expressed interest and are already watching right now. So let me see. Next thing I want to talk about is so let's dive right in here. So I'm going to pull up, I think it's this camera. Yeah. That's not the one we want. Let me see. So, I'll talk about like what photography actually is here in a moment. And here's just some examples of types of cameras that people may have in their home, may have, at work that they want to kind of get to know how to use a little bit more. you know, here's your standard point and shoot camera, and these you can buy for, you know, $100 now. I think even when I bought this, gosh, almost 10 years ago, it was about $150, $200. And these are fabulous cameras, and they do lots of things. I've taken a lot of very important photographs with this camera because it kind of fits right in your pocket. Now it's kind of been replaced by my smartphone. If you wanted, you could, for this particular class, if this is the kind of camera you have, you'll be able to do everything that I'm going to teach you. It's just going to be a little bit difficult because you're going to have to pretty much do a lot of things using the menu in your camera. Like, you don't, unlike all of these larger cameras, what we would call a DSLR camera or a mirrorless camera, and I'll get to that in a second. You could see there's lots of buttons and dials on them, and all of that can be really confusing for people. So I'm going to try to simplify all of that. And I want to make clear, this class is for people who have maybe little to no knowledge about photography at all, and may primarily take photographs with the auto mode on your camera. So my goal is to get you to switch from auto to M for manual, which is kind of a scary jump to make, but that's the goal. So if you have a camera like this, I would suggest getting your camera out, because we're gonna spend today looking at your camera and what some of the different buttons on there are going to do, and I'm going to try to give you some confidence just with the very basic understanding of your camera. And then I'm going to walk through some principles of photography, and then I'm going to give you some basic tips on photography to start. Also, I should say this class is an hour, and usually when I teach, it's about 2-hour classes. So I've kind of broken it in half just because people don't have as much of attention span of sitting in front of their computer or on their phone. So I'm not going to cover the full 2 hours in a 1-hour session. I'm just going to split them into two. So, okay. So let me see what I want to talk about right off the top here is, you know, what is photography? You know, I think we all have some idea in our minds of what photography is, but I think it's important to understand kind of just the basics of how a photograph is taken. So I learned photography when I was in art school 25 years ago, and when I was in art school, we made photographs on a camera that you put film inside and wound it in, and then we took photographs and you took the film out, and then we went into the darkroom and developed that film in the chemical baths, and then you hung the film up to dry, and then you made prints based on your negatives. And up until about, well, I mean, you could still buy film, and there's actually almost a resurgence in that today, but for, you know, 100 or so years, that was how photographs were made. And now, obviously, people are taking photographs on digital cameras and their smartphones. So but the basic principles of photography, whether you're using your mirrorless camera or a DSLR camera or your smartphone or your iPhone, which is the camera that's filming from above here, all the principles are the same. So let me see, the first thing we want to think about is how a photograph is made. So basically what you have to make a photograph, I'll just expand this view here. So to make a photograph, what you need is some sort of surface that you're shining light onto. So if we just think of, this is a UV light, right? And if I shine light onto a surface, just like my hand, nothing particular happens. But if you take a photographic plate and shine light onto it, right, and then we develop it, it's going to save the you're going to have exposed light onto that surface. And there's lots of different ways to take a photograph without a camera, which I think some people, it takes a little bit of, it's hard to kind of even imagine that, but very early photography didn't have cameras because, like, so for instance, some people would say the Shroud of Turin, that cloth that many people believe is Jesus's, it was a cloth that was laid over Jesus's body when after he was crucified, and there's this kind of ghostly image. Some people say that's an early version of a photograph, right? Because there was some sort of a cloth that the light came through and was exposed onto the skin, and then over the years the image kind of appeared on that fabric. So that is technically a photograph. But it's a little bit unruly to make a photograph that way. So over the years, cameras were invented to help literally focus light onto that surface so that we could capture an image. So early cameras were very big because to make the kind of material that could expose light could be exposed on it, everything had to be big, just like computers had to be big. So really early cameras were actually the size of a room, and you may have heard of things like a camera obscura, which if you've been down to Los Angeles, where I used to live for many years, on the beach in Santa Monica, there's a great big room that you can go into, and it was free, or you pay like 25 cents, and you go into this room, and there's like light shining down from a mirror above that is pointing down onto this big table, and you can turn this dial, and it kind of turns this mirror like a periscope outside, and it shines kind of what is happening on the beach down below. So that is a camera that's shining light onto the surface, and if you put a piece of film there, you could expose that film and solidify that image, and then you could develop it and hang it up in your house, which there's lots of artists that do that exact same thing. Okay, so as technology's advanced, we had smaller and smaller cameras. You've probably seen those images, of photographers in the Civil War era who had a big camera stand and threw a blanket over their head, and they took a photograph, and the photographic plate was literally this gigantic slate that went in and out of the camera. So, and then now you have a tiny little camera that occupies a small part of your smartphone, right? So all this, that's like a 5-minute, really quick general version of our history of photography. And if you're interested in that, obviously there's whole photography courses that go over the entire history of photography that could last. There's classes on just 1980s photography that could occupy you for an entire semester of college. Other things that I want to talk about here, just okay, so another great innovation to cameras was the invention of lenses. So lenses, you don't need a lens in a camera. In fact, you may have heard of something like a pinhole camera, which you can build. I'm sure you could find YouTube videos showing you how to do that. You could just take like a shoebox and poke a little hole on it, and then buy some film, go to your photography store and open it up in the dark, because you don't want any light shining on it. You need to tape it inside of a shoebox, and then you just put that shoebox somewhere and then take your finger off, so light is coming through that little hole, and it's going to create an image on the back of the shoebox where your film is, and then you just cover that hole, go back into a dark room, cover up the film, and then you buy some chemicals and you could develop that image. But again, you might find that image is out of focus. I've collaborated with a few artists and who've done pinhole camera sculptures, and it's really neat. Like, it creates very strange images. But lenses are kind of what took photography to the next level. And lenses literally help bring the light in, and then there's adjustments you can make to focus, like the focus ring and aperture and some other kinds of things that we will talk about over the course of the course. Okay, so the next thing I want to get to then is I want to talk a little bit about mirrorless and DSLR cameras, because that's primarily what we're going to be talking about. And some of you may not even know what kind of camera you have, or you might be thinking of buying a new camera and you want to know what kind of camera you should buy. So in front of me here, let me see, actually, let's put this here, like that angle. Okay, so in front of me here, I have these three cameras. These two is what is known as a DSLR, a Digital Single Lens Reflex camera. And this is a Nikon DSLR, and this is a Canon DSLR. And Canon and Nikon were the two main manufacturers, of which there's about somewhere 40 to 60 manufacturers of cameras, but Canon and Nikon occupy somewhere about 85% of all camera sales of DSLR cameras, still to this day. So they're the dominant manufacturers. Of course, there's people who have Olympus and Panasonic and Pentax and Leica and Hasselblad and all these other kinds of cameras that you may even own yourself. The difference between a DSLR and an SLR camera is the digital aspect, right? So an SLR camera is maybe one that you learned how to take photographs on, and you put the film into the bottom of the camera, and then you kind of pulled this, or you might have had a latch like this, and then you pull the film across, and then you kind of wound it, closed it, wound it up, and then took a shot, right? That's your SLR camera, right? So the way that those cameras worked is that they have a lens inside, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to hopefully see. Okay, maybe you can see right now that there's a little mirror inside here. And actually, I'm just going to switch to this. This is a PDF that I'll make available that kind of shows a little bit more of the technical information. So on the bottom of the image there, you see light coming in from the left. It's hitting this 45-degree angle mirror, bouncing up and bouncing out, right? So let's bring this back here. So what we're looking at in that diagram is, this is your camera. The light comes in, it hits this mirror, bounces up, and then out the viewfinder. And I'm just going to turn this on. What I'm doing also with this camera is stuff that you probably don't want to be doing with your camera. You do not want to be turning your camera on and taking photographs while the lens is off, because dust can get inside of your camera and effectively over time ruin the camera, or certainly have to get it cleaned. I'm doing this. This is an old camera of mine that I used for many years and made a living using this camera. And so I've retired the camera, but I still use it for teaching. So let me see. I'm just going to see if you can see. So when I'm pressing the button to take photographs, let me see, that light is hard to see, isn't it? There's a little flash where that mirror is flipping up, and I'm going to slow down the shutter speed here. And we'll talk about what that is in a little bit, but let's see if I can. So that was a faster shutter speed. Just gonna get that. So you see how it flashed. It's hard for you to see right now. Maybe I need to get better lights to show this kind of thing in the future. But what is happening is that lens flips up, and let's see here. I'm gonna add a little image of myself up here. Okay, so in the diagram you see on the screen right now, there is that image, and I'll just kind of hold. Do I have? I think it's hard to see if I've got the camera. Anyway, so the light kind of comes in, bounces up. Oh, I'm going to be this way. So the light comes in, bounces up the mirror, and then out the viewfinder. Okay, so when you're taking the photograph, when you press the shutter release, the mirror flips up and the light comes, instead of bouncing off the mirror and into the viewfinder, it hits the sensor, or what would have been the film in the past. Okay, so what we're trying to do with all photography is control the amount of light that gets into the camera, and that helps determine the exposure, and the exposure is how much light we have in the camera. I'm just gonna bring this computer back up. Okay, so that's kind of the basic principle of DSLR photography. You'll know if you have a mirrorless, well, I'll show you what a mirrorless camera is. So this is a mirrorless camera. Mirrorless cameras have been around for about 10 years now, but really they are coming into their own over the past 2 years. When I started teaching this class 10 years ago, everybody had a DSLR camera that they would bring to the class. You know, some people would have their point and shoots. And every once in a while, somebody would come to class with a mirrorless camera. And I'll admit, I would be kind of like, well, it's kind of a, you know, a amateur kind of tool. And like a lot of photographers who were using film, they just thought like digital photography is like, that it'll just never replace film photography. And we all know what happened. Kodak went out of business, right? But DSLR or mirrorless cameras have now become kind of they are becoming the standard for photography. So what a mirrorless camera does, and I'll just take this lens off, is if you can see in here, there's actually no mirror. There's no mirror that flips up and down like in the Canon or the Nikon DSLR that I have here. It's just flat. There's just the pure sensor visible at all times there. So I am absolutely not going to take photographs like this because there's really nothing preventing dust from getting into the camera. And when you have your camera on, you take your lens off, there's a ton of static charge that's going to suck in any dust that's out there into the world and onto the surface of the lens or the sensor. So the way to tell if you have a mirrorless camera or a DSLR camera is just to take the lens cap off. So with my DSLR, I take my lens cap off, and if I've got the camera off, I should be able to look through the viewfinder and see an image, right? Because again, if you think about it's like a periscope on a submarine, right? The light is coming in and it bounces off that mirror, and then I can see it. So the camera doesn't need to be on for me to see an image, right? That's a DSLR camera. A mirrorless camera, however, even if you have a viewfinder, I've got the lens cap off and I look through it and I can see nothing. The camera's off and there's just nothing to see. It's totally dark because there's no mirror bouncing light up and out the viewfinder. In fact, my viewfinder is a tiny little television screen, right? So I'm actually seeing what the sensor sees, not the so it's for most people this is a very minor, maybe even totally irrelevant kind of question. And why am I even spending, 5 to 10 minutes talking about this is because, and this will go into questions about what kind of camera should I buy, and I can answer more specific things at the very end of the video. But the long story short is, if you're going to buy a camera today, you should, without question, buy a mirrorless camera. DSLR cameras, you can buy a really nice DSLR camera, the kind of camera that professional photographers would use. That cost, when they were new, like $10,000. You can buy a really nice DSLR camera if you look around on eBay or Craigslist or Kijiji or wherever you buy your things, or even Amazon sometimes has used stuff. You can buy one of those $10,000 cameras for maybe $2,000 now. So you can get the kind of technology that photographers were using to take pictures of presidents and Super Bowl events and whatever kind of major event the photographers had those giant cameras. You could buy that camera for pennies on what they used to cost, because all of the major all the high-end photographers are switching to mirrorless cameras. So I think that's really important to understand, because that tells us a few things. What that means is, it's sort of, I was watching some videos on the Titanic the other day. If you were, so let's say, walking around on the deck of the Titanic and you saw a bunch of the rich people in their gowns and top hats walking around, and they're getting on the lifeboats and they're getting off the Titanic, and you're like, hey, what are you guys doing? Where are you guys going? Oh, we're there's a little bit of water coming in, just a precaution. We're just getting off the ship. Like, oh, okay. Should I come on? Oh, no, stick around. That's my analogy for DSLR and mirrorless cameras, is all of the high-end photographers are leaving the DSLR system and moving into mirrorless cameras. Now, mirrorless cameras, and if we look at the kind of the overall market of photography, mirrorless cameras occupy about 20% currently, and still DSLR cameras occupy about 80%. So they're still making these cameras, but the problem is a lot of the DSLR camera lenses do not easily adapt to mirrorless cameras. So let's say this Canon camera, the lenses for this Canon camera do not, I would need to buy like a $500 adapter to make this lens work on my Canon mirrorless camera, right? I don't know, it's, why they have done this is, it's all marketing, and that's a whole other thing. There's videos about all that conspiracy stuff, but basically it's like you have to upgrade all of your equipment if you're going into mirrorless. So if you don't have a camera right now and you're thinking of buying a camera, get a mirrorless camera without question. I think so let's leave it at that for right now, and then we'll, at the very end, if you have really more specific questions, should I get a Canon or a Fuji or whatever kind of mirrorless camera, leave it at the end. If you've just bought a DSLR camera last week, I would see if you could exchange it for a mirrorless camera instead. I'm literally that serious about it. And I know there's probably some people who know a lot about photography that will kind of check in on this video and would be appalled at that statement, but they know that I'm speaking the truth. Okay, so but I do want to say, but just before I move on from this, is that there's an old saying in, well, I don't know if it's old, but I don't know to whom it's attributed to, but the best, the best camera is the camera that you have. So technically, this point and shoot camera that's 10 years old, this camera is an infinitely, indisputably better camera than the camera that Ansel Adams, who is sort of considered like the grandfather of photography as an art form. He took these beautiful photographs of Grand Canyon in the 1910s, 20s or so. You know, this camera is infinitely better than that camera. And he is acknowledged as being one of the greatest photographers ever. If he saw this cheap little camera, his mind would explode, right? So people get sucked into the gear of photography, and they always want to and I do this myself. I spend time, like hours in the middle of the night, looking at different cameras and how to upgrade, and should I get this and that. And the truth is that you could take incredible photographs with the camera you already own. So that's another thing. If you already own a camera, I don't know if you need to rush out and buy another one right now. In fact, you may want to watch this series of classes with me using the camera you already have, and if by the end of that you get to the point and you feel like, you know what, I think I should get a better camera, mine feels a little limited, or the battery is, you know, kind of not lasting, should I spend $100 to get a new battery, or just put that $100 into a new camera? That would be questions that the answers might be more evident at the very end of this. Okay, so that's the first little bit of this. I want to kind of just look in the comments here and just look at some of the things people have been saying. So we have some people with a Canon T6i. That's very similar to this. This is the Canon T5i. Hi, Patricia. HS has a Canon SX720. I'm not familiar with that off the bat. I'm the Canon SX. I should also say that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different cameras, and their naming schemes are so bizarre and archaic and confusing. Even for somebody who's been taking photographs and using cameras for so long, it is like, to keep it all in your head is impossible. Heather has a Canon PowerShot G15 and a PowerShot SX500. Francis, outdoor nature photos, a Fuji X10 Jacqueline has. Nikon D5200. So I see a lot of nature, landscape, outdoors. Heather says forest, starry skies. Night photography, that's a whole other thing. That's really exciting. And then Sandy, who's my mother in Calgary, on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, she says, can any of this apply to taking iPhone pictures? And the answer is absolutely. I mean, I do teach a separate course on smartphone photography using the camera that is in your pocket all the time. So I teach a class like that, and honestly, the first class is very similar to what we're going to learn today. So yeah, absolutely, you can use some of the things we're talking about now to using your smartphone. Okay, so I'm going to now move on to talking about the cameras themselves and the different buttons on your camera. So if you have your camera out, take it out of its bag. You know, a lot of people, when they buy their camera, you know, the manufacturers, they sell them these gigantic things that, you know, fit over your, you know, and that these things are ridiculous, right? I got one too, I think because the kit that I bought had all this stuff, and I maybe used it for the first, when I was really first starting out in photography, and I had carried this thing around, and then after like a week of doing that, you realize this thing is a big waste of space. That would be my first recommendation, is get rid of your camera bag, and either, you know, and get your camera strap attached to your camera. So this is my wife's camera, and you know, you've got your camera strap, and I'll talk about how to use your camera strap later on, but you know, kind of, you want to be able to carry your camera and have it accessible as often as possible, right? So if your camera is in a camera bag, and I've seen people who come to my classes with not only their camera in their camera bag, but the lens is off and they've got a cap over the mount. So how often do you think you're going to use your camera if that's how you carry your camera around, right? If something interesting is happening, are you likely to stop, open your bag, unzip it, take out a lens, put the cap on, take the lens cap off, you know, turn it on, start focusing and take a picture, or are you just going to take your smartphone out of your pocket and take a photograph? I think it's, so my recommendation, leave the camera bag at home, take your camera out of the bag and take it with you as often as possible. If it's small enough it could fit in your purse, put it in your purse. If it's small enough that it can fit in your backpack, put it in your backpack. Take it with you to the grocery store. You know, as difficult as our present circumstances are right now, arguably this is a great time to take photographs, whether you're indoors or you're outdoors. You know, you can go for a walk with your dog all by yourself if you're not touching anybody or sneezing or coughing on anybody, but you have a great opportunity to take, photographs. Like, think about, this is probably one of the most unique, incredible times of all our lives right now. And people 20 years now, like we have an 8-month-old daughter who won't remember any of this, but this will be a formative time in her life, and I guarantee you at some point in the future she's going to come home from school and say, Daddy, we just learned about this whole COVID thing. Like, what did you guys do during that experience? And I will be, because I'm a photographer, I've got tons of images that I can show her and for that assignment or whatever that she has. So documenting things like, you know, stores that are boarded up, the shelves that are empty at the grocery store, the Skyping with your friends and family, or having a cup of coffee while your friend is standing on the street, you know, down on the sidewalk, and, you know, all those kind of things are going to make for incredible photographs later on. So take advantage of this opportunity and take photographs of what you're doing inside your house. Okay, so I digress. Take your camera out of your camera bag, carry it with you. And I was going to have my dry erase board, and I was going to write down on here that would be my tip number 1. In fact, this is a piece of paper from a different project. So I'm just going to cut this out here and make a little note to myself. And I think for Wednesday's class, I'll have this a little bit better organized. So let's go here. So this is tip number 1. Oops, that's covered up. Use the camera you already have. Okay. Get a better Sharpie around here. Okay. So tip number 1, use the camera you already have. So if we now look at our camera, what I think you should do, and I already see lots of comments in here, is make a note of what kind of camera you actually have. Like, often when I talk to people and I ask, like, what kind of camera do you have? They'll say, I have a Canon camera. Like, okay, well, what kind of camera? A Canon camera? Because Canon itself puts out about 5 different models of camera. Their make is Canon, but the model, like, this is a Rebel T5i or a T5i, right? So you'd want to know what that is, because for doing any kind of research on your camera, if you get kind of confused about what, you know, if there's a function you want to Google it, if you just type in a camera screen not turning on, you might find a whole bunch of different information that could be conflicting because of the different kinds of solutions for different models for that specific Canon camera. Okay, so writing down the information, finding out what that is, that's important. We talked about taking the lens cap off of your camera, and another thing people often do is they take a picture, put the lens cap right back on all the time, right? And I would say if I was going out and I'm walking my dog and I take my camera and I'm going to go out of the house for an hour, I would leave my lens cap at home. I'd leave it on the kitchen counter so I don't lose it, because again, it's just one less thing to do that you're not fumbling around and then losing this in the park somewhere, or it's in your back pocket, it goes through the laundry machine and something happens to it. So take the lens cap off. The lens cap is protecting the lens of your camera, but unless you're putting your camera into your backpack or your purse, or it's sitting on a shelf for a little while, the lens cap isn't, it's actually more likely to fall off than you are to get your fingers on the lens. A lot of cameras will actually come with what's called a lens hood. So this is a protector that you can slide on to the lens, and it helps prevent fingers from touching the surface, right? And you may have seen some larger ones, rubber ones. There's all sorts of different kinds of things that will help protect the lens. So it comes with a cap, but this is kind of like a little rubber thing that would fall off easily. But I love these kind of square, I also think they just look really cool, this lens hood. And generally they're somewhere between $5 for a generic one to maybe $30, $40 for, the actual Fuji camera lens or Canon camera hood, sorry. Okay, so you've got your camera, you've taken the lens cap off. We talked about, being able to look through the camera when it's off. And if you can see, so I'll say that my Canon, if I look through here, I can see things. Okay, I know this is a DSLR camera. Okay. There's all this information that's on the top of your lens here. This is also really significant stuff. We're going to get into that in a couple of classes from now, so it's not important for you to know just at the moment, but that this is actually important information. The next tip, while we're kind of talking about a lens, and this is just, what I would say, if you really want to get into photography, is to buy a 50mm lens. So most cameras, when you buy a brand new camera from Best Buy or Amazon or wherever, Henry's Camera, or your local camera store, they often come in what is known as a kit. And they often come with what is called a kit lens. And a kit lens is the lens that comes in the kit. And that might sound, obvious and everything, but generally, for the most part, the lens that comes with the kit usually is a zoom lens, and usually it's not the best lens. It's meant to kind of get you started so you can start taking photographs, but it's usually limited. It's often kind of a cheaper lens. So what I would suggest, if you've already got your camera and you want to kind of go to the next level, is to buy yourself a kit lens. So, or not, sorry, a 50mm, what they call a prime lens. So this is a 50mm prime lens for this Canon camera. And I think I bought this for, this is like maybe $100, brand new from London Drugs here in Canada. And this kind of lens is going to change your life. I cannot stress that enough. Having a camera that can shoot 50mm is going to give you that really cool look of of, let's say, a person's face being in focus and the background being out of focus. So we can even kind of just quickly look at the difference between the image you're seeing right now. This is being shot on an iPhone 7. And then I'll show you down below here. Now what you're looking at, this is a different camera. This is the Fuji X-T3 shooting with a 56 millimeter lens. So you could see in the background, first of all, those cameras are side by side, right next to one another. In fact, I'm just going to show you that using this camera here. And I'm going to come around actually so you can see. So, why is that being all strange? Okay, oops. So here, this is the camera this is the iPhone, and then here's the Fuji, right? So they're side by side. And if I can get to this, oh, you didn't see anything. Oops. Okay, sorry. Okay, so this is the iPhone, and right next to it is the Fuji X-T3 with the 50 millimeter lens. Right, so the difference between this camera and that camera is huge. Okay, so let's bring it back here. I'm just gonna remount that camera up above. Oops, it's a little bit cranky, is it? Okay. It's not, okay. Okay, so the difference between that look, so this is the Fuji again with the 50 millimeter lens, and then this is the iPhone. Now you can see in the iPhone, this image right now, the background, pretty much everything is in focus, right? And that's what your kit lens often does, is that it'll show everything in focus. Versus a 50 millimeter lens, you see how the background is blurred out behind me? That is something that is generally very desirable, especially if you're taking photographs of people. And I'll go into how to make that happen and control that in the future. So that would be my next tip, is buy a 50 millimeter lens. And you can buy, I'll go into like lenses and what kind of lens you should buy and all that kind of stuff later on. And you know why, because you can buy, let's say, this lens for a $50 to $100, and depending on the manufacturer. You could also spend easily $1,000 on this exact lens that is very similar. So what is the difference? And that's a whole other conversation we can have. Okay. Next thing, I'm going to put back the kit lens back on this camera. Kit lenses tend to be cheaper and lighter, more plastic, all that kind of stuff. So if you've got your camera's off, you took the lens cap off, let's do a little bit of a tour of your camera, and let's look at it. So in the front of your camera here on the lens, most, I would say, DSLR and mirrorless cameras have a little switch on there for the autofocus or manual focus. All right, so it might say AF and MF. Let me, if I can get that a little bit closer. All right, so you see that says AF and MF. So the autofocus, manual focus. For our purpose, let's switch it to A or AF, right? And that on the Nikon, it's I think the same here, right? It says AM or M, right? So that's manual or auto. So let's put our camera to the auto focus right now. Okay. And so now we've got that on. You may also notice your camera has a little switch here for stabilizer. We might say OIS for optical image stabilization. I would say for your purpose, you could leave the stabilizer on. Sorry, I need a little bit of tea here, talking so much. So turn your stabilizer on. Okay. The next thing I think is important to keep an eye out for is this little area here on the front of your camera. That's called the auto focused assist illuminator. Let me see, I'm just going to add a picture onto here of, and so we'll just kind of, this is the technical area here. You can kind of see some of the stuff. So that auto-focused assist illuminator is that little kind of button right next to, if you, on the screen you see Nikon, right next to the N in Nikon, that little thing. So what that is doing is, that is how your camera generally, this is a generalization, how your camera is measuring focus and how much light there is. So if the camera is making in auto and it has to make any sort of decisions on its own, it uses the autofocus assist illuminator to gather information. So you want to avoid having your finger covering that area. You want to make sure there's no cake or paint or whatever else could possibly be covering the autofocus assist illuminator. Let me see. Other things in terms of the camera that we're going to cover before we turn it on. I think we're just going to... oh, I do want to make mention at the bottom down here, on the bottom of your camera, the very next thing I just want to talk about is tip number 3. Buy a tripod. Now I realize these are things that you may or may not want to do. You know, the first one is the camera you have is already going to be good enough, but I would say if you're getting really interested in photography is buy a tripod. A tripod you can get for as little as like 20 bucks on Amazon, right? It doesn't have to. I have a tripod here that is a couple $100. My wife has one that's like $400 or $500 tripod, Manfrotto, which is like the Ferrari of tripods. But you know, here's a cheap little tripod you can get. You know, at you know, you might even be able to find something like that at the dollar store, right? And this little tripod will help kind of stabilize the camera, so you can set it down on a you know, on a park bench or the grass. It just, you know, if you're trying to, I've spent many times trying to balance a camera by putting like a lens cap under it, or you're getting change out of your pocket trying to shimmy it up to balance it. A little tripod like this will change your life again, because especially in one of the classes as we move forward, you'll see some of the amazing, mind-boggling photographs you can do, again, with the camera you already have, right? You can, yeah, so that's the next thing I wanted to kind of point out. Other buttons I think that you should know on the camera. I think that's for our purpose right now, that's everything. So we're going to turn your camera on. And to turn your camera on, you have a little switch here to turns on. You turn it on, and then let's point in, and let's turn so this little switch turns your camera on and off. Let's turn it on the Nikon, you know, it's right up here. Turn it on, and then just take a picture. Right? And ideally, for our purpose right now, what I would say is turn your camera on this is called the mode dial, and we'll talk about that in the future. But turn your camera to, there's usually, let me see, I'm going to go to, this kind of zooms in here. So this is an image on the top of a Nikon camera, and you'll see on the left there where it says the mode dial, there's a green image that says auto, and then right below it is one that has like a lightning bolt crossed out. My recommendation is to turn your camera to the setting with the lightning bolt crossed out. That setting is identical to the green one that says, the one with the lightning bolt is the same as the green one, identical, except when it's set to that setting, it will prevent the flash from going off. So it still does absolutely everything. It's just going to make sure the flash is not going to go off. So let's put it on there and just point your camera at anything and take a picture. Okay? So that's the first important thing, is learning to take a picture. And how do we take a picture? It's by pressing the button on the top of your camera. Generally, this is where it's located. And this button is called your shutter release. And that allows, what it does, if we go back to thinking about the mirror that we talked about at the very beginning, when there's a good view of it, the mirror. I press this button and the mirror flips up, right? It's releasing the shutter, so it snaps up. Right, so you're taking a picture with the shutter release, and then what I want you to do is I want you to now press the play button on your camera. You can see my battery is getting low. While I'm thinking about the battery, what I would suggest you do is charge your battery up the night before or the morning before these classes so that you have a camera with a nice charged up battery ready to go. So let's press play and look at the last photograph we took. The next important thing to do is to be able to zoom into your picture. So usually your camera has some sort of buttons. Let me see if it'll be different on each camera. I don't think I have an image of it, but there's usually one that's got a little magnifying glass. Let me see if I can how close I can get that to here. This is on the Canon. If I press the magnifying glass, it's zooming into the image, and then I should be able to kind of move around that image. Right? Maybe you don't have touch sensitivity on the back of your camera. Well, then you can use your, what do they call this? I think it's called the D-pad on your camera to kind of move up and around. And you see that little tiny screen on the bottom with the other or square with another square inside? That's telling us, I guess that's kind of, it's showing where we are in the image. So this is really important because you want to be able to take a photograph and then zoom in on the parts that are the most important and see if those parts are in focus, right? If you've got your autofocus on and you take a picture, you want to be able to zoom in generally on people's eyes. So if I'm taking a picture of somebody and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press play, and then I'm going to zoom in and look at their eyes. Are their eyelashes in focus? Because people will forgive lots of things with photographs. It's too dark or too bright, or what we call overexposed, underexposed. But if the image is out of focus and people's eyes are out of focus, it's going to drive people crazy. And if you're taking photographs for a client, they're not going to pay you for it, right? So taking photographs that are in focus. So people talk about this all the time, pixel peeping and zooming into photographs. That's a lot of the time when you look at a photographer and you just see somebody kind of standing, looking down in their camera. That's what they're doing. They're zooming into the photograph and checking to see if it's in focus. The next thing that I want you to be able to do is not only zoom in, but zoom out of the photograph. So let's say I was zoomed into this image. There should be another button on the back of your camera where there's a magnifying glass with the difference. So one has a plus in it and one has a minus. You want to click that so that you can zoom out of the picture and not only zoom back to the original, but continue to zoom out so that you see lots of pictures on the screen at once. And then you can kind of shuffle through all of your pictures quickly. And this is really helpful because I'm sure we've all been there where you're, let's say, with a friend, and they're like, I took this great photograph of my dog, and then they're like, just give me a second, I'm gonna show you. And then they're like, and they're going through each photo individually, and it drives you nuts so you want to be able to zoom out, and different cameras will be able, some cameras you'll be able to see, let's say, not just 9, but maybe 50 or 100 photographs all at once. You find the one that you like the most, or that you're searching for, and then you can zoom into that image, right? So that's really important. The next thing here, and I'm just going to give a couple more, and then we're going to go to the Q&A. The next thing I want you to be able to do that is really important is to be able to delete that photo. So we've just taken a bunch of garbage photographs of random things. Is press the garbage button on the back of your camera and go to erase. It usually won't just erase. It'll say, like, you sure you want to erase this? And it gives you the option to cancel or erase, and I'm going to press erase. So I think it's really important to be able to do a little bit of editing in your camera while you're taking photographs so that you're not coming back to your computer and dumping thousands of photographs on. Even if you're reducing that by you taking out, 20 photographs that you don't like, that's time that later on your computer you're going to save, or even just the memory on your computer getting clogged up with a whole bunch of old photographs that you don't even like, right? So just get them out of the way as quickly as possible. You have I didn't talk about it yet, but the SD card on your camera. So if I turn my camera off, I want to do this with my camera off, and I open my camera up and I have an SD card inside. And some of these are this is an older one. This is a 4 gigabyte SD card. You might have one that's like 250 megabytes. I think in this one I've got one that's like 256 gigabytes, which means I could take, probably maybe 50,000 photographs or more, probably far more than that on that size. I use that size of SD card because I'm shooting a lot of video, and video chews up a lot of space. Okay. While I'm here, another quick little tip is to buy extra battery. So this super comes in handy if you're out somewhere and you're taking photographs and your battery dies. Having an extra battery you can pull out of your pocket, throw right in there so you don't have to look for a place to charge it. And some of these cameras, the battery can take 2 to 4 hours to charge, right? So if you're on vacation somewhere and your battery dies, having an extra battery, and they cost somewhere between $50 to $100 for an extra battery, you want to be able to have that option, that availability to continue shooting. And I guess I just talked about SD cards, but the last tip here I'm going to give is buy extra SD card. And again, so I know all of these things cost money, right? And you do not need them all. You can, again, get away with the camera you have without all of this stuff, but it's just going to make your life easier if you have them. Okay, so these are my kind of main tips off the top. I'll leave that here while we're wrapping up this little part here. Okay. So what I want to cover really quickly is I'm going to give you guys a little assignment to do over the course of the next couple of days. Our next class is on Wednesday at 4 o'clock Pacific. That's Vancouver, Los Angeles time. So we're going to just keep on moving forward every single class, and you can go back and watch this video at your convenience. The first thing that I'm going to suggest you do, and let me bring up that video again. I'm going to edit this. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to suggest you do is find your instruction manual. And this is kind of provocative. Title here is to read your instruction manual, but this is not something you're going to go to the beach and sit there and, with a glass of champagne or margarita, and this is not your summer beach reading. Nobody likes reading these manuals, but having it available is really helpful when you get into a pinch and you forget how to change some sort of setting on your camera. Most new cameras these days don't actually come with a physical manual. Every manual for every camera that has ever existed is available to download, usually for free, from the manufacturer's website. So all of the equipment I've downloaded the PDF version of the manual, and they're on my phone. So if I'm somewhere in the forest walking around and all of a sudden I get some weird message on the back of my camera that says, error 497, and you're like, whoa, my goodness, what is going on? And I don't have access to the internet to Google the answer, I can go on my phone, open up the PDF, and usually at the very end of the instruction manual, I think it would be somewhere in here, is like the troubleshooting tips, and it'll give a list of all the errors or that kind of stuff, and then I can just find it on my phone and make the adjustment here. Because sometimes it's just something simple as like, the battery door isn't closed, and if it's not completely closed and locked, it's not going to take photographs or turn on, right? So having your manual available is super, super important. If you've got it, you don't want to carry maybe the actual physical paper one around with you, but especially for these classes, have it sitting on the desk next to you. So that if I ask you to make a change to a certain setting, you can find it, flip to a page, there's an index usually in the back. Okay, next question here, or next other tip that I'm going to give is to start, becoming more interested in photography. Start looking, watching videos like you're doing with me here on the web, looking at, I'm going to say magazines, if there's a magazine rack somewhere around you, but even just looking at, you're probably going to look at some Facebook stuff later on after this, or some news item. Look at the image that you're seeing, and just, instead of looking at it like, oh, here's a couple of doctors in the hospital treating a patient, is like, oh, that's an interesting photograph of those people. Like, how was that photograph made? Where was the photographer when that image was taken? So becoming more interested in that. And I would also suggest, you could do this right after we finish today, which we're going to end here in about another 15 minutes, is to type in, remember I said to find the name of your camera, right? So in this case, a Canon T5i, or you could type in Canon EOS Rebel T5i, and then tutorial, right? So the name of your camera, tutorial, in Google, and you will find tons of videos and information. Some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be less than good, some of it might have been made by some little kid in their basement, right? But they might be they might know their camera better than me even, right? So, but watch a video showing like somebody talking about the specifics of your camera. That is going to be super helpful to learn a little bit more about your camera. Okay, and then look, these are, on the image I put up on the screen there, you see, these are two of my favorite YouTubers who make videos about photography. There's Peter McKinnon. He's a Toronto-based photographer, makes really great videos. And then Kai W. Oh no. How long has the sound been out? Okay. Sorry, I just turned my sound on. I don't know how long. The sound cut out while you're introduced. Oh no. Okay. That is frustrating. So it looks like the sound cut out about maybe 15 minutes ago. Ah! So you probably didn't hear anything I just said. Okay. Well, in the interests of what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick up where I left off. I'm just going to redo the last 15 minutes of this video. Okay, so here's where we were. I was talking about photographers that I liked and people that I would recommend you follow on YouTube. So Peter McKinnon is, I think, one of the great bloggers. Okay, so he lives in Toronto and he shoots really great videos showing different kinds of ways of using his cameras, and he reviews certain cameras, but really fun, playful, very creative personality. And Kai W, who I think is from Hong Kong, he's super funny, charismatic guy who reviews almost every camera that comes out. So it's worth, if you're thinking about buying a new camera, he's somebody that would be a great person just to kind of look up and see, because I'm sure he's used it and would give you some like real world kind of feedback on whether it's a camera worth buying. Just making sure that audio is still coming on there. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about here is zooming. And often, you know, this image on the screen is meant to be a little bit provocative, and it's kind of silly. But if you're shooting landscape, you're shooting animals, you know, having a zoom is really handy, right? Because if you're taking a picture of a deer or a bird, you can't just run up to them and take a photograph of them. You want to be able to zoom in to that creature, take a photograph without disturbing them. So maybe they don't even know you're there. So that's really helpful. That's why you'd like this image on the screen of that giant zoom. Like that's probably a $20,000 or $30,000 lens. Like that's crazy, right? And that's really heavy. You can see there's a handle on it, right? Like, and it's just the camera, the body of the camera is this tiny little thing on the end. So, my recommendation is instead of zooming all the time, is to use your feet to get up off of the chair and walk closer to something. The closer you get to it, it's going to change your experience of that object. So let's say I was wanting to take a picture of those lenses. If I just zoom in on it, right? So I'm just going to, let's say, come back here. If I zoom in, it's going to be a different photograph than if I went closer. In all sorts of different ways, it will make sense later on when we learn more about the camera. But I might get here and then look and say, you know what, maybe this would look better if I was up here, or if I was down here, right? So that is using your feet to zoom rather than just relying on the zoom function of your lens is very, very important. Okay, so this next thing is looking for different points of view. So most of the time, 99% of all photographs these days are taken from this angle. People looking at things with the camera at kind of eye level. Instead of taking a photograph from this level, my recommendation is to get down, you know, lower, right, waist level or higher, right, so that you're changing the point of view that people see. So you can see in the image this guy laying on the floor taking a photograph, which looks ridiculous and silly, but it's going to create a totally different, like I take a lot of event photography, and everyone's got a camera in their pocket now on their iPhone, right? Or Samsung or Pixel 5 or whatever it is. So everyone's taking the photographs like this. If I gave a client photographs like that, they would say, well, what's the purpose? Like, I've got hundreds of these, you know, tagged on my social media. Why would I want that kind of photograph? So I'm trying to get down low or get up higher so that I'm providing somebody with different point of view, which is especially important. Let's say if you have kids and you're taking photographs of children, right? Most people take photographs of their kids like this, the kid looking straight up into the camera like some kind of god that they're speaking to. If you instead get down a little bit lower and take a photo of the child face on, it's going to give that child or a dog or a cat some agency. All of a sudden, oops, this is losing cameras here. Batteries are dying on all these cameras because I've run over here. So you want to, oh, I think, do I still have audio coming off here? Okay, good. And let me see. I'm going to just really quickly switch cameras. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, so so getting down low to like a child or an animal or any kind of thing is just going to make them feel like they're being respected as an individual, right? So you want to honor them by getting onto their level. So those are the kind of 5 quick little tips there. And now I'm going to go back over the questions, which I've been doing for a little while here. So I appreciate people waiting during that little bit of a break there. So my apologies for that technical glitch. So some of the questions that came up were, so Josh said he has a Canon 6D Mark II, which is a really, really nice camera. So should he upgrade to the Canon EOS R, which is Canon's new mirrorless system? My recommendation would be, it's tough to say because you've probably, if you're a photographer and you've got that really nice Canon camera, you probably have some really nice lenses. I would say Canon is planning on releasing like a new camera that records 8K footage sometime this year, but considering everything else that's going on in the world, who knows what the when that camera will actually come out. And that will also be a mirrorless camera, which will be amazing. But having said all that, those lenses on your 6D Mark II are not directly compatible with the Canon mirrorless camera. So you would need to get an adapter to make those lenses work on on the mirrorless camera if you were to buy it. Which is one of the reasons why I suggest to people to get into the mirrorless systems as early as possible. Because if you're getting into photography, you're going to get into buying lenses, and often they're more expensive than the camera themselves. So having a starting that process the earlier is better, quite frankly. What else here? Amy says, yes, a 50mm lens is way better. My photography got way better. Yeah, absolutely. A 50mm lens is going to change the kinds of photographs you take. Absolutely. Jacqueline asks, what is the difference between AFC and AFS? So those are different kinds of autofocus modes, and I don't have time to get into that right now. We'll talk about that on the third class, which will be next Monday. But I appreciate the question. It is a good question, but it's not something I can answer in a minute here. Heather asks, I have a scratch on the lens. Should I get another lens to replace it, another 50mm lens? If you really like that lens, then the answer is yes. But I would also suggest maybe trying a different lens, maybe getting a 35mm lens, which is, you know, give you a little, it's kind of like zooming out a little bit, or maybe a 70 or 90, something that's a prime lens that, if you really like doing portrait photography, like a 90mm lens, you're gonna have to stand much further away, almost twice as far. But if you like that blurry background look, a 90mm lens is just gonna give you incredible images. Okay, and all the sound cut out on all of these. Yeah, so people saying, if any of his family members are watching, call him now and let him know. So, my apology for missing that there. I did see all those comments roll in, and I was thinking, like, what's going on? People must have lots of great questions for the end of the video. I don't know if that answers the many of the questions that came up during this episode. I still see there's a few people, 10 or so, they're still tuned in right now, so I appreciate you sticking around even though things weren't working. Anyway, I think for now I'm going to call it a show, and I really want to thank everybody who tuned in and kind of helped make this a great experience for me personally. We're going to, things are, as we go, we're going to have a little bit more opportunity to do some playing with images. I'm also going to take new photographs and show you. I'm going to do all of the assignments that I'm giving out for people. The project I would suggest you do over the next couple of days is to take photographs from different angles. So instead of taking all of your photos like this and then zooming in on things, is to get down a little bit lower, get up a little bit high. So let's say right after this, you're gonna want to go and take some photographs of your partner making macaroni and cheese on the stove, right? And instead of just taking a photograph of them doing this and they walk to the sink and they come back, is to, you know, get your camera down low next to the counter and take a photograph of the steam coming off the pasta, right? Or, you know, a photograph of your partner from below. It may not be the most flattering photograph, but it's going to be a very different photograph. And I think that's going to start opening your eyes to the possibilities in taking photographs. Same thing is just moving closer to something, right? Let's say you want to take a photograph of some toys that are on your bookshelf next to your television. Instead of just sitting there on the couch and using the zoom lens on your kit lens, is to stand up, walk across the room, and to take a photograph of it sitting there. Or to even better, take it off the shelf, move it around, and start putting it on the counter. And take some photographs from above, from below, and the sides. Then you're going to want to start arranging things. That's when you start thinking like a photographer, where, okay, I've got this toy. What if I move this mug in behind, and then I'm going to put, and then that's where the creativity starts happening. So next class I'm going to talk about like some more practical tips on taking better photographs. We're going to talk about like the golden ratio and the rule of thirds and compositional kind of strategies to take that whole idea to a next level. And that's stuff that is also helpful for using your iPhone, even if you, or just even your regular point and shoot camera. Okay, so thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate all of the comments, and we'll see you on Wednesday afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you are here on our beautiful planet. So enjoy the rest of your time. Take some great photographs. I suggest take your camera out and take some photographs. If you want to send them to Twitter and tag me in your photograph, I'll see them, and I'll give you some feedback in the beginning of next show too. So that would be my strong recommendation. Anyway, have yourself a wonderful afternoon, and stay safe, everybody.